Hi, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for being here. Let's start it. Having a quick. I hope you can all see my screen.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So, welcome everyone. This is First Step webinar, Building Confidence and Managing Anxiety in Your Child. My name is Abigail Roden, and I am a child wellbeing practitioner at First Step.
And my name is Shakira Johnson, and I'm also a child wellbeing practitioner at First Steps.
So today is part one of 2 sessions. This week, our focus is all about understanding anxiety. So we're going to be looking at what anxiety is, where it comes from, and what might keep it going. We are recording the session today, but all of your microphones and your videos are off, and nobody's names are going to be shown to anyone else attending. The recording will be made available on our YouTube channel for you to kind of go back and watch again. So you are welcome to take notes, but there isn't any need to. And we also have a resource pack, which will include all of the slides and a couple of other resource materials that we're going to mention. Feel free to ask questions in the question function. We're not going to answer them until the very end, but if you have a question that comes to mind, feel free to just put it in the box on your screen, and your name and the question will only be seen by Shakira and I. Okay. So these are our aims today. First of all, we hope to help you understand what anxiety in children looks like. We're going to be exploring factors involved in the development of anxiety, and also factors. So what can keep difficulties with worries and anxiety going? And then we're very, very briefly going to introduce some strategies for parents to support their children in managing anxiety, but this is going to be the main focus next week, because we kind of feel that the first step to overcoming anxiety is to really understand it and what it looks like for your child. So, what is anxiety? Anxiety is an experience that is common to all of us as humans. It's a very, very normal reaction to a situation that we might believe to be dangerous, stressful, or uncertain. So what happens when we feel anxious is our brain believes we're in danger, and we have an inbuilt alarm system which alerts us that something isn't right and then prepares us to take action. And what this does is it causes a chain of reaction in our body, which explains why we think, feel, and behave the way that we do when we're anxious. And when our brain does this, this is called the fight, flight, freeze response. So our thoughts become really focused on the danger, our muscles might tense up, our breathing gets quicker, we might feel shaky, sweaty, or nauseous. And all of this happens because our brain is just trying to protect us. And it's kind of gearing us up to react to the dangerous situation. And it can be really helpful. For example, if there was a wild animal charging towards you, anxiety would help you to run out of the way and get out of the way really fast. The problem is the part of our brain that controls that fight, flight, freeze response doesn't know the difference between an animal charging towards us or if we were going to a new school. So while there's no real danger or threat in going to a new school, both of these situations feel really dangerous and scary and can cause the same symptoms of anxiety. So it can be really helpful for us to separate the experience of anxiety into 3 areas. So that includes the way that we think, the way that we feel, and the way that we behave. So our thoughts tend to become really focused on the danger and overestimating this danger and underestimating our ability to cope with it. We then feel all those physical symptoms as a result of the fight, flight, freeze response. And then understandably, we behave in ways that either kind of anticipate or avoid the danger. So on this slide here, there's some really common thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that are experienced with anxiety. So have a look for a moment and think about which of these symptoms you might recognize in your child. We've got constant worrying, frequent crying. Maybe your child gets quite clingy, seeks lots of reassurance. They might outburst kind of into anger. They might get nauseous. They might avoid situations, difficulty concentrating or focusing. It can present in lots of different ways, and everybody experiences it very differently. So this slide is kind of a really important thing for us to hold in mind as parents, because often when thinking about the symptoms of anxiety, it might be easier for us to notice those behaviors that the children are showing. So young people's brains have not yet fully developed their ability to express thoughts and feelings. So they often will do so through their behavior, which is why we tend to think of behavior as being a bit like the tip of an iceberg. So we can all see the behaviors, we can all see the tip of the iceberg. There's those thoughts and feelings, the kind of things that they are going through in their thoughts and feelings are hidden and they're under the water and we can't see them so clearly. So for example, a child who is worried about going to school because they are afraid that something bad might happen might procrastinate. They might kind of ignore his parents when they ask them to put their shoes on. And they might kind of be really slow and not focused. So that challenging behavior is very visible. We can all see that kind of the way that they're responding. Whereas the difficult thoughts and feelings that they're experiencing are going unheard and unnoticed. So it's really important to know that children's anxiety can present itself in lots and lots of different ways that might not be so obvious. So the focus of worries tends to be linked to where children are at in terms of their developmental stage of their brain, and also just their life stage and other aspects involved. So this table shows each developmental stage and what worries we might expect to see. So for example, at 12 to 18 years old, we see an increased importance in the peer groups. So we're likely to see an increase in worries about social situations and friendships. Please do note that this is just a general table. So we might expect to see these kind of worries developing at these ages, but also every child is different and every child develops at different stages. So there are several different types of anxiety, and these types can be categorized based on the focus of the worry. Most of the time, these difficulties go hand in hand. So it's really rare that we see a child who has just one of these difficulties. So the first one is general anxiety, which kind of refers to worries about a wide variety of things. While some children might experience worries, they are a little bit more focused. So, for example, some might worry about separating from their loved ones or from home, and we refer to that as separation anxiety. Worry about being evaluated negatively in social situations. So we call this social anxiety. Others might be worried about a specific object or a specific thing or situation, and we call this phobias. And then panic refers to experiencing really intense physical symptoms of anxiety, perhaps from nowhere. And then obsessive thoughts and behaviors refers to kind of an obsession or compulsion to repeat certain behaviors or rituals. And all children will experience these worries and fears in different ways. So it's really important for you to kind of consider your child's unique experience of all this.
Okay, so as we know, anxiety is a normal part of life. And some anxiety is actually a good thing, but only in small doses, because it motivates us to take action. So, for example, if you were crossing a road and a car was speeding towards you, you would want your anxiety to motivate you to move out of the way quickly. Or, let's say for your children, if they're taking a test at school, you'd want a little bit of anxiety because it helps to motivate them to study and to prepare for the exam, for the test. And it can also indicate a number of strengths in children. For example, having a vivid imagination or being a good thinker, and their sensitivity to their own feelings and that of others. It gives them a great skill and empathy. So our goal is not to eliminate anxiety completely, but sometimes anxiety can become excessive, which is when we see problems occurring. So when thinking about whether your child's anxiety is a problem, consider if anxiety is impacting on their ability to do things that they should be able to do in these three main areas: their academics, their social life, and their mood. So many parents tend to wonder what causes this excessive anxiety. And it's common that parents might think that they've contributed to it in some way or worry that they've done something wrong. And while parents can play an important role, it's important to know that anxiety never has just one cause. It's actually a number of factors together that play a role in its development. Genes, first of all, they do play a key role, and we know that anxiety runs in families. But research shows that it's only about 1/3 of what actually makes children anxious. So this means that anxiety can be explained essentially by 1 part genes, 2 parts environment. As well as that, children actually also inherit particular characteristics and personality traits that might make them more prone to anxiety, such as sensitivity or being a bit shy. The other factors are more to do with a child's experiences and environment, which might explain why some of your children may be more anxious than their siblings. The experiences children have over time has a really, really crucial influence on how fears and worries develop. Children with anxiety might have experienced a particular adverse event or something stressful, such as bullying or witnessing something frightening. And we also know that children learn from their experiences. They rely heavily on information that they get from these observations and are likely to use your behaviors as a way to work out whether they should be anxious themselves. Research actually shows us that children with anxiety are particularly good at paying close attention to the behaviors of those around them and are more influenced by this than children without anxiety. So let's say, for example, if you're scared of dogs, you might try to contain your fear in front of your child so you don't scream and run away, but you might subtly cross the road every time you see a dog walking towards you. Your child will actually pick up on that subtle message and they'll begin to learn that dogs are dangerous and must be avoided. And then lastly, anxious children are on the lookout for how people respond to what they do. It's really natural that parents demonstrate concern about their child or about how their child will cope with difficult situations, particularly if that child is prone to anxiety. And understandably, parents might try to reduce their child's distress by maybe stepping in to protect them or helping to solve the problems for the child, which facilitates the child to actually avoid their fears and gives them, and maybe giving them lots of reassurance. This can also be nonverbal. For example, once again, a parent afraid of dogs might watch their child while stroking the dog, see what their child is like stroking the dog, but if they're watching them with concern and a tense, body and showing, tense body language, this can kind of indicate that, the parent doesn't really trust the child's ability to be able to keep themselves safe or to be able to cope or even trust the dog. So all of these are completely natural and understandable responses designed to protect our children. But as I said, they may actually suggest to the child that something bad is going to happen or that their parents have a lack of confidence in the child's ability to cope. So when we think about where anxiety comes from, there's no simple answer. and the likelihood is that many factors played a role. Okay, so now that we've thought about anxiety and what it is and where it comes from, take a moment to think about your child's anxiety. Have a think about what are some of the symptoms that they have, what are some of the triggers maybe, what type of anxiety are they experiencing, and what could have contributed towards the development of it. Just take a moment to think about that. Okay, hopefully you're able to think about that.
Yeah. So we're going to move on now to kind of think about what might be keeping anxiety going in your child. So while it's really helpful to think about the development of anxiety and kind of where it comes from, it's not always essential to know exactly what that is. Because as Shakira mentioned, it's really complicated and there's usually lots of reasons. But what we can focus on is what's keeping it going. And there's a car stuck in the mud on the screen here because just like a car stuck in the mud, what we want to start figuring out now is what is it that is keeping you stuck and how can you move on? How can you get out of the mud? So as we previously mentioned, anxiety is accompanied by thoughts, unpleasant feelings, and unhelpful behaviors. And these three areas are really key because what they do is they feed into and they reinforce each other in what we call a cycle of anxiety. And I'm going to show you what I mean by this. So when anxious, our thoughts tend to be kind of really, really focused on overestimating the danger of a situation and then underestimating our ability to cope with it. So for example, if a child was worried about an exam that they had at school, they might think that they are not going to know any of the answers and that if they fail, they're going to cry in front of all of their friends maybe and in front of their teachers, and perhaps that their parents are going to be really disappointed in them. And thinking in this way can really get in the way of learning new things, and children will become really, really attuned to noticing only the things that confirm their anxious thoughts and are very likely to filter out anything that says otherwise. There's also the physical symptoms of anxiety, which can feel really unpleasant and really uncomfortable. And it can be really frightening for children who don't understand where it comes from to experience it. And it can also confirm their anxious thoughts, that there's something wrong and that there's danger. And also children might come to fear those physical feelings in themselves. And then lastly, there are two common patterns of anxious behavior, which play into a child's cycle of anxiety. So these two common patterns include avoidance, so trying to get away from situations that are anxiety provoking, and or using unhelpful safety behaviors. So during an anxiety provoking situation, using something that we call a safety behavior. And this is really understandable. Feelings and physical symptoms of anxiety they feel really horrible. And so children really understandably want to avoid situations that make them worried. For example, a child who's worried about performing badly in swimming lessons might avoid going to classes. Or they might use a safety behavior to help them cope. So for example, a child who maybe is worried about making mistakes in their homework, they might constantly seek reassurance from their parents that they're doing it right. And these behaviors are called unhelpful safety behaviors because they might help the child feel better in the short term and it might bring that anxiety down. But in the long term, it keeps anxiety going and can sometimes make it feel even worse. And this is because the child learn, for example, what happens if they do go to the situation that makes them anxious. Perhaps expectation might not come true, or it might not be as bad as they think, or maybe they can cope with it. They also don't develop the ability to kind of build up coping strategies. So what happens is then the next time they're faced with that situation, they rely again on avoiding it or using a safety. And so this is why we call it the cycle of anxiety, because it kind of keeps you stuck in a cycle. So here is just a quick example of a child's cycle of anxiety. So this is a child who is scared of being alone in their room at nighttime. And so the thoughts that this child might be having include maybe thinking something bad in the room and that their parents aren't going to be able to hear them calling for help. And then they might experience some kind of physical feelings. They might get fast heartbeats, rapid breathing. They might start trembling, feeling really tense, nauseous, dizzy. And then the behavior might include procrastinating bedtime. They might get out of bed continuously and ask their parents to stay with them until they fall asleep. What happens is the child will then believe that they were okay only because they had their parents there with them. And they will continue to depend on that the next time they go to bed. And then the next time and the next time. And so as you can see, it becomes a bit of a vicious cycle. So now that we've kind of thought about cycles of anxiety, think about the last time your child was anxious. Think about perhaps what the situation was, so what triggered it, what might have been going through their thoughts, how might they have been feeling in their bodies, emotionally as well, and what did they do in their behaviors. So try and have a think about what this cycle of anxiety looks like for you and your family.
Okay, so now we're going to think a little bit about the role of. So as I've already mentioned, parents' own behaviours and responses have a big impact on children's behaviours. This is why certain things that parents do can not only impact the development of a child's anxiety, but can also maintain it. So normally at this point now, we would show a video. As you can see on the screen, we've got a picture there from Finding Nemo, but unfortunately, there's been a bit of an update on the system, which means we can't show the video at the moment. But I hope that most of you will be familiar with Finding Nemo. If not, we will be sending this clip to you at some point. And it's just a clip of Nemo's first day of school. You've got Nemo and his dad. And basically, we just see that his dad, named Marlin, is incredibly anxious. Nemo is totally relaxed. He's excited to go to school. But his dad is like, have you done this? Have you done that? And when it's time to leave, he's like, okay, let's go out. Okay, now let's come back in. Let's go out again. Okay, let's come back in again. And he was just very, very, very anxious. And our reason for showing that video, obviously that's extreme, and I don't expect that that's necessarily your reaction for your children on their first day of school. However, it's just to show that the way that parents react can actually maintain the anxiety. Because although Nemo wasn't incredibly anxious, if a parent is constantly saying, have you got this? Have you got that? Have you that? Okay, let's do this. Okay, let's go out. No, let's come back in. Let's go out again. Let's come back in. It's going to maintain the child's anxiety. But once we send the clip, it will make a bit more sense. But it's just to think about how it can be maintained by how parents react and behave. So parenting children can stir up strong emotions in us. And if we see our child is anxious, this will likely trigger our own worries and frustrations or anxieties. And sometimes the way that parents react when their children are anxious comes from this natural drive that we have as parents to protect our children. But these reactions are very powerful, and the way that parents respond can contribute towards it being maintained, as I said. Okay, so now just a bit of a reflective slide. Just think about your own feelings towards your child and their anxiety. Do you share similar worries as they do? Have you both been through similar experiences? How does seeing your child anxious impact you? We really just want to reiterate that this is a normal part of being a parent and completely understandable. So I'm not condemning you, not at all. One of the keys to helping your child with their anxiety is to become aware of your own cycle of anxiety first. So what are your own thoughts? What are your own feelings? What are your own behaviors? And how might they be impacting on your own child's anxious cycle? There are particular parent responses to child anxiety that we might consider to be escalating, and there are two main types. The first is if a parent over-engages with the child's anxiety and becomes anxious themselves. This might include becoming very involved, protective, or providing lots of reassurance. And this might inadvertently feed into a child's anxiety. It might actually confirm their anxious thoughts to be true and lead them to believe that their anxiety is uncontrollable. This doesn't encourage them to test out or try out new things, which means they won't be able to develop the skills they need to deal with challenges independently. So that's the first one. And the second one is if a parent dismisses their child's anxiety. For example, by telling them they're having a silly worry or by not listening to them. This response has the potential to make them feel bad about their anxiety and worry that they will not be able to change. Once again, all these responses are completely understandable, and some can be helpful, but may perhaps be contributing towards keeping the difficulties going. So now looking back on the example where the child was worried about going to bed at night, in this instant, the parent might react by spending the whole evening taking their child back to their room, eventually lying down with them until they fall asleep. And this can actually feed into the cycle because the child doesn't get to learn important things to overcome the worry. They don't get to learn that they can cope on their own without the reassurance and presence of their parent. And in turn, they'll begin to rely on this again and again each night. Here we've got another example. In this example, a child who's anxious about a test the next day. They might behave or misbehave by lashing out and being irritable. And then the parent might very understandably become frustrated and also lash out. And it might end up in a big explosive argument. In this instance, the child might feel bad for having anxiety and also might not get to learn helpful ways to cope with their anxious thoughts and feelings, and therefore expresses themselves through the same behaviors next time. So just to clarify, my aim here and our aim here is not to blame parents. We've already mentioned that there are many factors involved in a child's anxiety development and maintenance. Instead, we just want to bring awareness of parents to their current responses and how they might use their position to respond positively and be a part of a solution for their child's difficulties. From what we know about the factors involved in how anxiety develops, we can then think about ways to overcome it. Specifically, we want to support you to support your child in breaking out of their own cycle of anxiety. So next week is when we'll be focusing on strategies. And as you can see on your screen here, this is the list of strategies we'll be working through. We're going to think about helpful ways to respond to your child through something called containment. Then we're going to give tips on educating your child on anxiety. Think about how to help your child recognize and stand up to anxious thoughts, ways to encourage brave behavior and testing out anxious expectations, thinking about developing skills and problem solving, which is massively important. And also we want to think about ways to promote and build independence. And we're also going to think about how to help your child manage their big worries through mindfulness and different relaxation exercises. And then lastly, we're going to think about ways that you can look after yourselves and manage your own worries.
So this session is focused on kind of understanding anxiety, what it looks like and where it comes from, and what keeps it going. So before we meet again next week, we really encourage you to spend some time reflecting on what you've learned today. So kind of what are you taking away from today's session? What's something that maybe surprised you? What's something that you learned? Perhaps think about your child's cycle of anxiety and how your responses might impact on this. And we also would like you to start thinking about what strategies you currently use and kind of think about what's helpful, what works, what doesn't work, and to kind of get you starting to think about kind of responding to your child's anxiety. And as we mentioned, next week we'll be thinking about ways that we can break out of that cycle. So just to let you know that this on the screen here is a book that we always recommend families purchasing. It's called Helping Your Child with Fears and Worries, a guided self-help book for parents. And it's written by Kathy Cresswell and Lucy Willits. And it's a really helpful book full of information, very similar to what we are covering today and what we will cover next week as well. So now we have quite a bit of time now for some questions. So if you have anything, if you have any questions, pop them in the box and we'll do our best to answer them.